We start our show today with a new ambassador in Israel. The Bahraini Ambassador Khaled Yousef Al-Jalahmah arriving in Israel yesterday to officially begin his post as representative of the Muslim kingdom. So welcome. But while building some bridges, Israel may be burning others. Foreign Affairs Minister and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid holding a press conference Wednesday night where he sharply criticized the United States' withdrawal from Afghanistan, calling it a good idea but with a bad execution. And that's not all. Lapid likewise taking aim at the White House's plan to reopen its consulate for the Palestinians in Jerusalem.
We think it's a bad idea. And we've told America we think it's a bad idea because, for two reasons.
Now, Lapid is explaining that reopening the consulate sends the wrong message to the world and may also destabilize the government. Also, of course, Israel views Jerusalem as its sovereign and undivided capital. Joining me now with more, ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan, an international relations expert from the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, as well as former head of the Foreign Relations Directorate at the Prime Minister's National Security Council, Micky Aharonson. Now, Asaf, I'm actually going to be starting with you. What did Yair Lapid exactly say in this press conference yesterday with the American Foreign Press? What did he see in his eyes from the U.S. retreat from Afghanistan?
First of all, we've seen Lapid saying in a Foreign Press Association press conference yesterday, when he literally explained that in his eyes, in the eyes of the many Israeli officials, we've seen a bad execution for a good idea. It's been 20 years since the Afghanistan war has begun, ever since 9/11, and now that the U.S. has decided to finally pull out, they call it a right decision, but a poorly done execution. Despite the fact that we've seen voices like former Prime Minister Ehud Barak saying that actually cannot expect evacuation to go this smoothly, and in general, evacuations are a hard thing. As someone who evacuated Lebanon, he did it himself. But we do see that there's a lot of criticism regarding how the Biden administration handled the pullout.
Of course. All right, well, Micky, I want to get your take on this now. How did you see this playing out in your opinion? We've heard many reports of the United States, as we've just heard from Asaf, calling this retreat, a success. President Biden very recently saying that, but many other officials are calling it a disaster. And we've seen footage showing weapons and vehicles being paraded by the Taliban that were left over by the United States, not to mention some 200 plus Americans and hundreds more Afghans who were trying but could not get out of the country in time. So was the United States right in pulling out at this time, in this way? Take it away.
Well, we have to separate between two issues. There's the withdrawal itself, the evacuation, and there's the decision to withdraw. About the evacuation or withdrawal, I don't know of a photogenic withdrawal. I don't know of a happy withdrawal. I think it was tragic for the people on the ground, but they managed in a few days to evacuate, I think, 100,000 people. So again, I don't know how you can make it look better, be better. That's a question that can be discussed. About the fact that they're leaving Afghanistan and whether it was a failure, I think it's a question of expectations. If the expectation was to preserve a relatively Western way of life, with the cost of the presence, actually, of 2,500 soldiers, as were in the last years, I think it was successful, and it was a mistake to withdraw because this was not a war. 2,500 soldiers is not a war. But the expectation to change the Afghan, to turn it into a nation building, to change the DNA of the nation was a failure. You don't change the DNA of a theocratic tribal society in 20 years. I think the source of the expectation was following World War II, when Japan and Germany so successfully came out of the tragedy of the war. But Afghanistan and the Middle East are not Germany and they're not Japan. And the result is accordingly. So again, it's a question of expectations, I believe.
All right, so how do you see this potentially affecting the power structure or struggle for power in the region? Because again, there are reports that are worried about the Taliban forming relations with Iran and even some Western countries with Afghans and activists in Afghanistan saying, please do not forget what the Taliban is.
It's very easy to forget now what the Taliban is, because not because they're saying they're different and they're better, and nobody's buying these declarations, but because there is a choice between the lesser of two evils. And if you have to choose between Taliban and you have to choose between ISIS or Al-Qaeda, the choice is very clear. If there is a sovereign organization that you can negotiate with, and there was no doubt negotiations with the US, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to evacuate that many people, then I imagine suddenly Taliban becomes something even reliable, I would say. This is so ironic, I don't believe I'm saying that. But if the choice is between Taliban and other terror organizations, I guess Taliban would be dealt with, people would negotiate with Taliban, because otherwise, what's the alternative? And regarding their friendship with Iran and so on, I think right now they are in the process of trying to turn from a guerrilla terror organization into an organization that is sovereign, that is running a state. And for that purpose, they would be willing to do whatever it takes, even become friendly, I would say, with Iran. Let's not forget the hostility, the deep hostility between Taliban and the Shia Iran. So right now, in order to turn into a state apparatus from a guerrilla organization, they would be willing to do everything and say everything. Let's wait a few months until they're settled, until they're entrenched in the country, and then we can judge who their friends are.
All right, Asaf, back to you quickly. You know, we've heard also, again, Lapid's statements regarding the United States reopening the consulate and the two-state solution. You know, why is Israel so worried about this consulate?
We're seeing a lot of concern from the Israeli regime, and of course, the foreign minister said it himself yesterday, and Bennett told it to Biden during their meeting. The main reason Israel is worried about it, it's because it's going to create a different approach to what Trump has been trying to show in the U.S. support back in his government. And the Biden administration wants to turn that around. But in the end of the day, Israel is worried that if that will happen, we're going to see a destabilization in some of the efforts done by the Trump administration, the Palestinians disregarding us again because they're seeing the U.S. is more in their favor. There's a lot of stuff that's been going on, and you can't be sure how the Palestinians are going to take it, even if the U.S. reopens the consulate.
All right, Micky Aharonson, thank you so much for joining us. Asaf Nissan, thank you as well.
Thank you so much.
All right, 2 weeks have now passed since the recent fires in Jerusalem were finally wrestled under control, and the word is still out